We have a really weird situation for NASCAR DFS this week because last week we were in Talladega. And in Talladega, we know we want to stack the back. We want to load up on place differential guys, soak up all the juice that we get there. We don't usually talk about that at Kansas, but because Talladega helped set the order for the Kansas starting order, we got a lot of good drivers starting deeper in the field and a lot of weirdos, not weirdos, but non-regular drivers starting up front. It leads to a very weird dynamic for DFS because we have to decide, do we go for the laps led? Do we go for the plates differential? How do we play things for this week? And I think you're going to like the answer that we have on tap for today. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, here to break down, yes, it's the Buschy McBusch Race 400. Why not? Let's go for it. It's been fun to write that on all the content this week, making me look like a fool, but hey, let's embrace it. Have a lot of fun. That locks at 3 p.m. Eastern on Sunday for this week. So should be a lot of fun. Like I said, I think it's going to be a fun roster construction week for sure. One most of you should enjoy. Some good strategy as well for this race. We'll break down the strategies for this race and my top drivers in each salary tier in just a bit. But quick as a reminder, we have a lot of stuff here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. We have MLB, NBA, NHL, PGA back next week. UFC back next week, most likely as well. Austin Swaim off this week, but back next week to break down the UFC card. Make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. Also, if you didn't tune in last night, we are back again Friday night for rounds 2 and 3 of the NFL draft, breaking down all the DFS betting and season-long implications of the draft. Fun show last night with Brandon Gadula, JJ Zachariason, and Ryan Williams and myself breaking down each pick. I think that should be good too. We can talk more broad stuff like dynasty rankings, some win totals that Brandon and I like. We'll go through those and also get our first look at DFS lineups from Ryan as well. So make sure you tune in YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter, the FanDuel channels on each of those channels. Make sure you tune in 7 p.m. Eastern on Friday, and I believe we're giving away another jersey once again for that as well. Also coming up this week, got the Kentucky Derby almost here. If you're new to horse racing or have never bet with TVG before, now is the perfect time to give it a shot because you can bet the Kentucky Derby risk-free. That is right. You'll get up to $200 back if your horse doesn't win the Derby. And if you already have a TVG account, you can get back up to $10 if your horse finishes in second or third. It is all part of the money back special, and it's available on select races this Saturday at Churchill Downs. TVG gives you all the tools to tackle the Derby. Just sign up with promo code COVER. That is promo code COVER, COVER, if you want to bet the Kentucky Derby risk-free, exclusively on TVG.com or the TVG app. Go to TVG.com/cover for details. And again, we broke down the Derby with Megan Devine on Covering the Spread earlier this week. Search for Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcast. Track breakdown here for Kansas. Normally, again, we talk first about the length of the race. I would tell you, hey, this race is 267 laps long, and let you know the implications of that. This week is very different because the starting order is so jacked up. The reason it's jacked up is because NASCAR, with no qualifying due to COVID-19, uses an algorithm to set the starting order. And a big part of that algorithm is where drivers finished in the most recent race. And for this week, that's all over the place because Joey Logano flipped, Kyle Larson blew an engine 3 laps in. There are a lot of good drivers that finished poorly in Talladega who are now starting in the back of the field. That means we've got guys with place differential upside, but the length of the race does still matter. There are 267 laps here. That means there are 26.7 FanDuel points available for laps led. That's a big number, and we don't necessarily want to ignore it. So can we load up on place differential options, or do we need exposure to the front? The answer to both those questions is actually yes, to an extent. A good template for this is actually the spring Kansas race back in 2019, because it wasn't the algorithm stuff that set the order, but they had qualifying, they had inspection after qualifying, and if drivers failed inspection, their qualifying lap was voided, and they started in the back. 4 of the top 10 drivers in my model for that race failed inspection and started in the back. For this race, 5 of the top 12 drivers in my win simulations are starting 20th or lower. We got guys in 15th and 17th as well who are also in the top 12 of my win simulations. So it's a very similar situation where we have legitimate drivers who could win this race starting further back, and that creates a very interesting dynamic. the perfect lineup from that race had a blend of both place differential guys and front runners. Two of the drivers who failed inspection made the perfect lineup, but two who started up front did as well. They led laps. They finished in the top two spots in the race. And that was partly because there was a punt play, a low salary driver who made the perfect lineup. But I think the overall process there is one we can apply to this week. The first thing is that you do want to bump up those drivers starting further back. That's especially true for Kyle Larson starting 32nd. Also true, at least in part, for Joey Logano, Alex Bowman, Denny Hamlin, Martin Truex Jr. Those guys are the cash game plays, and they grade out well for tournaments as well. So we want to bump those guys up. But we don't want to necessarily ignore the front. We don't have to ignore the front, is the way that I phrase this. In that Kansas race 2 years ago, Alex Bowman was a mid-range play. He pushed for the win, would have been his first win at the time, and he led some laps. Because the big dogs, a lot of relevant drivers were starting further back, Bowman had less competition to lead laps early on. I think that could happen for a couple of guys this week. We'll talk about them in the tier-by-tier breakdown, where because you've got Larson, Truex, Hamlin, Elliott, the guys who are usually leading laps starting further back, that leaves open more laps led for other guys. Those laps led still count, and they could get a bunch while those other studs work their way through the order. So while I am bumping up the place differential guys quite a bit, I don't want to ignore the front. We'll talk about some guys who fit that in a bit. Basically, it's a week, and the way that I would phrase this is you pick the guys you think have the best speed no matter where they're starting. As long as they can win the race, you can justify using them no matter where they start. We do need to make sure they have upside, though. And the way that you can quantify that is, can they get place differential? If yes, lock them in. Can they lead laps? If yes, lock them in. Can they do both? If yes, go nuts. Go absolutely crazy. If they're not getting you a lot of place differential or a lot of laps led and they have a mid-range or higher salary, it's going to be tough for me to get there for this week. What that means is it's a very evaluation-heavy week where you have to decide who's the best drivers for this race. And if you're a legit NASCAR fan, you love watching the sport and stuff like that, that should make you very happy. If you're a data nerd who has good data on who will win this race, that should also make you very happy. So it's a good week. If you know who will be fast, it's a good week for NASCAR DFS. To determine who will be good and fast, I'd lean heavily on Atlanta, Las Vegas, and Homestead this year. Those are the only three other races using the 550 horsepower package that were not at a super speedway, but they're also all 1.5 miles long. Homestead and Vegas, both flatter 1.5 mile tracks, similar to Kansas. Homestead, probably the most similar track to Kansas on the entire circuit. The tire wear is more intense at Homestead than at Kansas. But if drivers ran well in those three races, I would expect them to run well again on Sunday. On a similar note, if they've struggled in those races, I would expect that to continue on Sunday as well. So if you like what you've seen from drivers in that three-race sample, feel free to go hard at them no matter where they're starting. That's the way I'd phrase things for this week, is you have flexibility to use drivers no matter where they're starting, as long as you think they've got the juice to push for a win. So to recap here, we have a lot of freedom with our lineups. You do want to bump up the place differential guys, especially Larson, because they have great floors. They have very good ceilings, and Larson's ceiling is tremendous. But don't ignore the front entirely in doing so. There's less competition for laps led. That benefits those guys greatly and could give them a massive boost while Hamlin, Truex, and Larson work their way forward. And if you're trying to evaluate this, lean on Atlanta, Las Vegas, and Homestead to determine who to use for this weekend. That is the overall strategy for this race. It's an evaluation-heavy race. If you're a NASCAR or a data fan, you have the tools necessary to fill out good lineups, and I think that is a benefit for sure for this week. So let's go tier by tier and break down my favorite drivers in each salary range on FanDuel.com, starting off with the elite tier. That is Denny Hamlin at $14,000 through Brad Keselowski at $12,500. This is a great tier. Keselowski benefits from the clean air, and that's very good, but I'm not quite as high on him from a win perspective as the others. And I love all three of Larson, Hamlin, and Truex. They are all place differential options. Larson starting 32nd, Hamlin 20th, Truex 15th, but they've been, I would say, the best three drivers on these tracks this year. They are actually the top three drivers in the current form section of my model. They are the top three most likely winners in my win sims. I think they can lead laps. I think they can get you place differential at the same time. That's a really tough thing to turn down. Of these guys, Larson will be the top guy for me. He has led 44% of the laps in the 3 relevant races this year. That's stupid. It's insane. He had a top 5 average running position in all 3 of those. He is the most likely winner in my win sims at 16.4%. So I will be heavy on Kyle Larson, but I will include Hamlin and Truex in those lineups too. And that does mean I could be glossing over the front of the pack, but I do think that there is a couple mid-range plays who work out really well in conjunction with them, who we'll discuss later on. So I can get those guys, get that big place differential, use a mid-range play up front, and kind of have the best of both worlds. Larson will be the chalk this week. That's guaranteed, but it's justified. I am going to try my darndest to be overweight on Kyle Larson for this week. I think that this is your core for cash games. They should be your core for tournaments too. I'd rank them Larson 1, Truex 2, Hamlin 3, and Keselowski 4 for this week. The second tier on FanDuel is Joey Logano at $12,000 through Ryan Blaney at $10,000. And this tier does have a couple of place differential guys in Joey Logano and Chase Elliott. Logano starting 29th. Elliott is 17th. I might wind up being underweight on Joey Logano. My guess is that people use him in tandem with Larson and just go all out for place differential. And that makes sense. I just don't think his upside is as good as the others, because he hasn't been as good on the 550 horsepower tracks so far. In the 3 races they've had so far this year, his average running positions are 14th, 11th, and 13th. So he'll probably get you a top 10. And starting back in 28th, that matters. 29th, that matters a lot. But I don't think his win odds are as high as the guys like Hamlin and Truex, specifically in the middle of the field. That's going to lead to me ranking Elliott higher in this tier, especially for tournaments. He's starting 17th. He has not been dazzling at these tracks either, but I know he has speed because his teammates have won 2 of these 3 races. Larson almost won the other as well. So I feel better about Elliott competing for the win here than Logano. I could be wrong. That's very possible. But I do rank Elliott highest in this tier over Joey Logano, despite the fact that Logano is starting deeper in the field. I could be wrong, but I think that's the way I'm doing things for this week. The other guys starting at the front in this tier, so we can kind of go based on how likely they are to win. I think that Ryan Blaney is a top option there, and he could be the guy you turn to in your Larson-Hamlin lineups to lead laps semi-early. He is starting 7th. He has had a top 7 average running position in 3 straight races at Kansas. He won in Atlanta, so he had a 6th place average running position in Las Vegas. If we're looking at performance in this package, you would think that because I'm talking down Logano, I would talk down Blaney as well, but he's actually been good. He's been a lot better than Logano. He's also just $10,000, which is under-salaried, I would say. So Blaney will be one of my favorite potential lap leaders just because the salary is so low. I would still rank Logano ahead of Blaney, but I might wind up having more Blaney because he is lower salaried and fits my likely build better. So straight up, I rank Logano higher, but I wouldn't be shocked if I have more Blaney just because of the way I'm looking to build my lineups. The mid-range is William Byron at $9,500 through Austin Dillon at $8,000. And the other potential mid-range winner here is William Byron. I think that Blaney's a consideration. I might be a tiny bit higher on Byron. He is $9,500 and starting 2nd. He's on the outside pole, which means he's alongside Keselowski. I like Byron's speed better for this race than Keselowski's. Byron won in Homestead, which is great for this weekend. He has had a top 7 average running position in all 3 races at 1.5-mile tracks. He has 6.1% win odds in my win simulations. That's not too shabby at all. And in fact, it's actually the highest mark of anybody starting in the top 6, ahead of even Keselowski. So Byron is alongside Blaney as a fun way to get some mid-range laps led. And I think that if you're going with a Larson-Hamlin or Larson-Truex lineup, I think you give some consideration to jamming in either Blaney or Byron as well so they can lead laps early on and potentially win this race. The big place differential guy in this tier is the other Hendrick driver, Alex Bowman. He is $9,200 and starting 25th. He has been very good on these tracks as well. His average running positions are 8th, 10th, and 11th. He finished 3rd in Atlanta, and his win odds are also high in my win simulation. So if we're talking cash games here, Bowman is the best play in this tier by a wide margin. And straight up, I would say he's better for tournaments too. But I would be interested in pivoting to Byron if I get the vibe that Byron will be under-rostered with everyone focusing on the place differential plays. So keep an eye on the talk within the industry for this week. If you get the read that Byron will be underappreciated, maybe you could pivot for tournaments away from Bowman, because Bowman he's going to grade out well in projections because of where he's starting. But I think that Byron is very interesting for me from a tournament perspective for this week. Bowman is a cash game play. The other place differential guy here is Kurt Busch. He's starting 28th. I think he's kind of similar to Logano, where not sure how fast he'll be. His equipment has been really bad this year. He ranks 14th in the current form section of my model, so it'll probably be fine. Like 14th is not bad for a guy starting 28th. I just love the upside of Bowman and Byron a lot more than I like Busch. I will use some Busch out of obligation, similar to Logano, where I'm going to use him out of obligation. But if I wind up being underweight on him, it's not going to bother me that much. So Busch and Logano, the two guys starting further back, I'm a bit more wishy-washy on. I'll still use them, but if I have less of them than the public does, that's okay. I'm fine with that. The value tier on FanDuel is Tyler Reddick at $7,800 through Chris Buescher at $63. If we want to jam in Larson, Truex, Blaney, or Byron, we got to find ways to save some salary. And there are two guys in this range I really, really like. Got good track histories, good in this package this year. And there are also two guys who are forever linked in Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Chris Buescher. They swapped rides 2 years ago. Buescher went to Roush Fenway Racing. Stenhouse went to JTG Doherty. That's why they're linked. But honestly, they've both been super impressive this year. Stenhouse has had a top 16 average running position in all three relevant races. He's actually finishing these races strong as well. He's got a top 12 finish in all three. So it's weird, but Ricky Stenhouse Jr., quietly consistent, ? Not bad. He's starting 23rd. He's $6,800. I think he's got some upside, so I like him quite a bit. Buescher might have upside too. He's not starting as deep. He is starting in 16th, but he has speed this year. He had a 10th place average running position in both Homestead and Atlanta. Seems like he runs the best on tracks with heavy tire wear, and Kansas is not as big there as Atlanta and Homestead, but there is some fall off. So for $6,300, I will take stabs at Buescher. Between those two, you've got two really solid value plays to make spending up for the studs even easier, and I'd be inclined to take advantage of that opportunity. The punting tier is Austin Cendrick at $6,200 on down, and the third lower salaried option outside of Buescher and Stenhouse is Austin Cendrick. He is starting 38th. We've talked about this every time he's been in the field. He's in good equipment. He's low salaried, starting the back. That's exactly what you want. It hasn't really panned out yet, but he hasn't really killed you just because the floor is so good with where he's starting. I'm going to keep on going here because it makes things very easy up top. I do think that the presence of Cendrick makes Stenhouse an elite tournament pivot. Same thing for Buescher, given people will likely go to Cendrick over them, but I'll have plenty of all three. I think they're all very interesting. And guys who make it a lot easier to jam in the guys like Larson, Hamlin, and Truex. I will say that Daniel Suarez is at least interesting down here as well. Really good speed in Atlanta. Starting 21st, he's $5,800. So between Suarez, Cendrick, Stenhouse, Buescher, it should be pretty easy to get to the studs. And I think that's an intriguing thing for me this week. They give you upside elsewhere, and I want to take advantage of that opportunity. Okay, let's finish up here with picks to win for Kansas based on my win simulations. One guy above 10,000 and one guy below. And if you were listening, you kind of know where we're going with this. The guy above will go with Kyle Larson. He is the most likely winner in my sims, despite the fact he is starting all the way back in 32nd. I think he's going to win. I feel very good about this. I think Kyle Larson will win this weekend. The phrasing for the second one depends on the way we phrase it. If I say $10,000 or lower, it's Ryan Blaney. If we say below 10,000, it's actually Alex Bowman. I kind of want to pick William Byron, though. So I'm going to pick William Byron. We're going to deviate from the rules here. I do think that Byron has a good shot to win this week. One in Homestead, really good speed, starting up front, easy access to clean air. So my official win picks for this week, Kyle Larson up top, William Byron at the bottom, and I think those are two of the picks I felt better about this entire year. We'll see how things play out on Sunday in Kansas. That is all the time that we have for today. As always, if you have additional questions for me, I am on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast MLB podcast up there already with NBA and NHL as well. And our Covering the Spread podcast on the Kentucky Derby is available by searching for Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. As always, if you like what you hear or if you win some money, make sure to leave us a rating and review because that does help us out a bunch. Back again later today for the NFL Draft Stream, 7 p.m. Eastern, the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter pages. We'll see you there to talk about rounds 2 and 3 of the NFL Draft. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck to you at NASCAR DFS at Kansas. We'll talk to you once again next week. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast powered by numberFire.